Hi YouTube! So this blog post should be pretty exciting because it's the first time where I'll actually be talking about what happened in Japan. Yay! Namely, part-time jobs. So I actually quite enjoyed having part-time jobs in Japan, probably because they weren't too labor-intensive and they were around spring semester, which I'll explain in the next video. The jobs I'll be talking about are actually part-time teaching jobs, and when they were over, I actually missed the people I had been working with, both the students and some of my coworkers. Now, despite what you may think, being able to speak Japanese is not necessarily a requirement for getting a job, or at least a part-time job in Japan. In fact, there will be jobs available to you just because you can speak English. That being said, being able to speak at least a little bit of Japanese will be immensely helpful to you in both this and pretty much all aspects of your life in Japan. In my case, it was during the actual jobs that being able to speak Japanese helped. For me, all of the application process was done in English, and when I got to the whole teaching part, sometimes Japanese was useful. I had other friends who had to be able to speak Japanese or at least read a little bit of Japanese to apply for a job, but then didn't need it at all when they were actually doing said part-time job. The first teaching job I'm going to talk about is the teaching job I had as an assistant teacher at a middle school. Every year, Waseda Middle School has a 5-day English seminar, and the school asks the IP coordinator if there are any students among the IP study abroad students who would like a position. Since they came looking to us, applying for this job was pretty easy. I just had to fill out a CV, which is like a more formal version of a resume, and send that in with an email explaining that I was interested in this job. A couple weeks later, I got an email confirming that I had gotten the job, and then 2 weeks before the actual job started, there was a training session that was about 2 hours long. After that, I just did the 5-day teaching job. So it sounds like this job fell into my lap, and it pretty much did. But the point of this is not to tell you that, oh, look how easy it was to find the job. The point is to tell you that all of the email, the CV, the training, and the communication, all of it was done in English. I actually didn't think I would be speaking Japanese at all during the week to the students, because one of the rules given to us during the training session was that we weren't allowed to speak in Japanese to the students, because they were there to learn English. They were there to learn English from native English speakers, so they didn't want us to be speaking to them in Japanese at all, because it's just too easy to fall back into your native language and not get the practice that you're there for. We as teachers didn't speak any Japanese to the third-year students that we were teaching the whole time, but it was a different story with the first-year students. On the third day of the English teaching seminar, the first-year students starting putting together a skit, just a short little skit that would be presented on the final day. Up until this point, the don't speak any Japanese at all rule had held firm, but the main teacher decided, without telling the assistant teachers beforehand, that the students were allowed to discuss the ideas for their skits in Japanese, and that each assistant teacher assigned to individual groups would help them with the translation if necessary. If I was unable to speak any Japanese at all, I wouldn't have been able to do this part of the job, and things like that just happen in real adult life. The job you sign up for often calls for you to do things not necessarily in the job description, so yeah, knowing Japanese helped a lot there. The other teaching job that I had in Japan was a private English conversation tutor. So there's multiple ways for a student to find an English conversation teacher, or you as an English conversation teacher to find a student. If you search Craigslist, there's lots of job postings looking for a English teacher, or you can use the very useful website Hello Sensei, which a link for that will be in the description. On Hello Sensei, you create a profile. You want to make sure it's as complete as possible, which you'll understand once you go to the website. And once you've set up a profile, students will contact you to set up a meeting time. There are also English conversation schools that you can apply to, but I don't know anything about those. I just saw them all around Tokyo. So if you wanted to apply to one of those, I can help you. The English conversation student that I ended up teaching for a long period of time was actually introduced to me by a friend. So my friend was leaving Japan after studying abroad for 1 semester. Obviously I was going to be there for another semester, and her student needed a new teacher, so she gave him my line contact information. He contacted me. We set up a couple meeting times to see if we would work well together as student and teacher, and we did. So I had that job until I left Japan. What did the actual job entail as an English private conversation teacher? I would meet up once a week with my student, and for 2 hours I would converse in English with the student. My job was to correct him if he made any mistakes with pronunciation, grammar, word choice, and if he did make a mistake, I would explain why it was wrong. If he had a question about something, I would explain that. Another thing I had to do was if he'd watched a TV show or a movie in English and he came across a phrase that he didn't understand, I would take the time to explain it to him. So obviously the job was pretty easy and laid back, especially since the conversations were conducted in English. However, when I was using English words to explain other English words and phrases, my student didn't always understand what I was trying to explain, and sometimes I just couldn't figure out a good way to explain whatever he'd asked about in English. So at those times I would explain part of what I was trying to say in Japanese, or I would just explain what the gist of the meaning was in Japanese. The whole point of this vlog is to let you know that you can find jobs in Japan even if you don't necessarily speak Japanese. It helps if you know where to look, it helps if your friends can hook you up with a job, but it's not impossible, and it'll go a long way to helping you finance your trip if you don't necessarily have enough money right out. But obviously, handling unexpected parts of the job, getting a job in general, and just living in Japan will be a lot easier if you can speak some Japanese. One last thing, if you do plan to get a part-time job in Japan, make sure you get a work permit. Sama-sama out.